Taking aim at the World Health Organization, Donald Trump makes good on his threat to cut funding to the agency. He says it's failed its duty in the time of coronavirus. But what about Trump himself? And what kind of leadership has he shown in dealing with the pandemic? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Rochelle Carey. It will disappear one day like a miracle. That's how U.S. President Donald Trump described the coronavirus crisis in the early days. And he went on for weeks assuring Americans we have it totally under control. But now the U.S. is the worst affected country with more than 609,000 COVID-19 cases and deaths topping 25,000. Health workers are struggling with medical shortages, hospitals are overwhelmed, and the president is under pressure. He's accused of ignoring warnings of a full-blown crisis and misleading Americans. But Donald Trump insists he's doing the job right and is using his daily briefings to promote what he says are his achievements. He's just made another controversial decision by halting funding to the WHO. He accused the UN body of mismanaging the spread of the virus. His critics say he's just trying to deflect blame for his own failures.
We have deep concerns whether America's generosity has been put to the best use possible. The reality is that the WHO failed to adequately obtain, vet, and share information in a timely and transparent fashion. Had the WHO done its job to get medical experts into China to objectively assess the situation on the ground and to call out China's lack of transparency, the outbreak could have been contained at its source with very little death, and certainly very little death by comparison. This would have saved thousands of lives and avoided worldwide economic damage. Instead, the WHO willingly took China's assurances to face value, and they took it just at face value, and defended the actions of the Chinese government, even praising China for its so-called transparency. I don't think so.
Trump had previously praised China's response to the outbreak. Just last month, he tweeted, just finished a very good conversation with President Xi of China, discussed in great detail the coronavirus that is ravaging large parts of our planet. China has been through much and has developed a strong understanding of the virus. We are working closely together, much respect. The president says he has plans to reopen the U.S. economy in some states by the beginning of next month. That's despite the country's health experts advising caution. Anthony Fauci, its top infectious disease expert, says the U.S. does not yet have the critical testing needed for businesses to restart. Trump also seems to have backtracked on his statements about who has the authority to lift lockdowns, but he insisted the federal government would have the final say.
The governors are responsible. They have to take charge. They have to do a great job. And we're going to suggest that they check people through tests or otherwise coming into their states, and they run their states very strong. Now, if we disagree with it, we're not going to let them open. We're not going to let them open. If some governor said, has a lot of problems, a lot of cases, a lot of death, and they want to open early, we're not going to let it happen. So we're there to watch. We're there to help. But we're also there to be critics.
Trump's previous announcement that he has total authority, his words, to decide on reopening the economy, that sparked controversy because legal experts say that's not true. And New York Governor Andrew Cuomo says the president is trying to pick a fight.
The president will have no fight with me. I will not engage in it. I've sat here every day for 44 years asking New Yorkers to remember that this is not about me, it's about we. I understand you're personally inconvenienced. I understand you're frustrated and stressed and anxious and you're feeling pain. Think about we. Think about get past yourself and think about society and think about your family and think about interconnection and act responsibly for everyone else. This is no time for politics, and it is no time to fight.
Let's introduce the panel now. In Washington, D.C., Douglas Sloan, a Democratic strategist and political consultant. In Seattle, Sarah Altantawi, a political analyst and professor of modern Islam at Fordham University. And in Nutley, New Jersey, Stephen Rogers, an advisor to the President Donald J. Trump 2020 campaign. Welcome to all of you. So let me start with you, Sarah. So President Trump's criticism of the WHO and his choosing to cut funding, what signal does that send to the world?
Well, I think it's unfortunate, and of course I understand your point of view, but I feel that it's unfortunate that as commentators and as the media, we're actually playing into Donald Trump's strategy here of diverting attention away from his catastrophic mishandling of the coronavirus issue.
Sarah, we're actually not doing that. We have a lot of time to talk, and I have a lot of questions. We are definitely going to get to some of those questions. I was just starting with the WHO because that's the most recent thing that's happened. We're gonna drill down on a lot, I assure you.
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, it's sending the signal to the world that the United States is attempting to distract from Donald Trump's mishandling of the issue by targeting the World Health Organization. It's sending the signal that there's this capricious leadership that will withdraw $400 million from the world body that is most qualified to handle a pandemic at a time that in the midst of a pandemic, at a time that we need them most. And it sends a message to the world that, unfortunately, we are really losing our stature as a reliable world leader.
Do you think that the global response to this pandemic has been suffering and lacking because, just objectively speaking, the world is not looking to the U.S. for leadership as it has in the past?
Yeah, I've heard from many different people around the world about how depressing and just kind of destabilizing it is to their perception of the world order that the United States has abdicated its responsibility to this extent. Europe generally has looked to the United States as a beacon to the West of democratic norms. The norm erosion that Donald Trump has kind of foisted upon the United States over the last 3.5 years has been something that people have been looking at with grave concern. And now with the pandemic, it's just, we're really seeing the consequences of what happens when you just allow this kind of erosion of democratic norms to go unchecked again and again and again. So not only is it concerning on that theoretical level, but on the practical level, the United States, I would be concerned, and I'm sure many countries are concerned about travelers from the United States into every other area of the world. This is an enormous problem. And so President Trump is talking about how he closed China or cut off China. Well, I wouldn't be surprised if many other countries in the world banned Americans from traveling.
Stephen, so Donald Trump is criticizing the WHO for basically saying that they went easy on China. And we have already shown our viewers some tweets where Donald Trump was praising China weeks and months ago. Is Donald Trump the person to actually criticize the WHO when it comes to this response? Does he have any credibility to do that?
Yes, he does. Look, keep in mind that the United States is no longer the world's ATM. The American people are fed up with funding organizations like the WHO and, in fact, pretty much fed up with funding the United Nations with their tax dollars. China, for example, did, in fact, go into very important trade agreements with the president. They were working out well.
So hold on,
here we have a situation.
Stephen, we're not talking about trade agreements. Very specifically, I'm asking you, Donald Trump was singing the praises of China during the response to the coronavirus. Does he have any credibility to cast aspersions upon the WHO right now?
Well, I was getting to that. You asked me about his credibility, and I was laying the foundation for that. The fact of the matter is that we're dealing with a communist regime. There's a reality check here. We're not dealing with a democracy. We're not dealing with a free country. We're dealing with a communist regime. So the question is, are we going to believe the communist government in Beijing over the president of the United States, whose
Donald Trump
credibility is greater.
believed them,
And to
Stephen.
my point,
Stephen, Donald Trump believed them.
yes, yes, we believe them, and pretty much the entire world believed them because they were acting and behaving in a little bit of a different manner than they did in the past. Via what? Via the trade agreements. They kept their word with regard to trade agreements.
Okay,
but all
so
that's out the window now.
Okay, so
and their
Douglas,
credibility.
Hold on just a second. Douglas, let me ask you this question. There's going to be a lot of questions to be asked once the world gets through this pandemic about how various organizations, various administrations responded. There may be some critiques of the WHO that perhaps are legitimate. But right now, the focus is on the United States. That's where the deaths are happening, the majority of deaths. Is Donald Trump in any position? Let me rephrase this. Why do you think Donald Trump is talking about the WHO now?
Well, I think it's obvious that Trump is using one of his oft-used tactics to try to deflect some of the criticism and some of the focus away from him to another organization. Right now, Trump is being heavily criticized for his botched response to this pandemic. So this is a typical Trump tactic to deflect some of the attention away from himself during this time. You know, Trump should have been responding to what his medical experts were telling him back in December. We didn't see this country start to get ready for this pandemic until March. So this is just a typical Trump tactic to try to deflect attention away from himself in the middle of a crisis, and it's not something that we're falling for. I mean, there is some, you could make the argument that the WHO should have acted differently, that they should have responded differently to this, but a lot of this is on Trump.
Sarah, how concerned are you about some of the language that Donald Trump is using at some of these press briefings? For example, he said obviously many things that are flat out not true. One of them in particular is that the federal government has the total authority basically to flip a switch and decide that they want to turn the country back on, when that is actually not how the country works at all. That is not what America is built on. How concerning should that type of language be, particularly at a time of crisis?
It couldn't be more concerning. The last thing we need now is a constitutional crisis, in addition to a public health and political and economic crisis. It's very interesting that now President Trump is claiming, quote unquote, total authority. When we needed the federal government to claim authority, namely over the pandemic response, as opposed to leaving it up to governors and the states, suddenly the federal government was not a shipping carrier, and the federal government, puts up its hands, and the states and the governors are whining, to use Trump's language. So in that context, in which the federal government is extremely important, they raise their hands and say, hey, this is not our job. But suddenly when it comes to reopening the economy, or reopening America, as President Trump puts it, now he claims king-like powers. So it's completely incoherent and dangerous. And, I think it's hard to say exactly what's going to happen. One way of looking at this is that President Trump is really paving the way for governors more and more to increasingly ignore him. You have pacts made in the West Coast states between Oregon, Washington, and California, and 5 Northeast states, including, interestingly, the Republican governor of Massachusetts. Those 2 clusters of states have come together and said, we're going to work together to figure out when it is safe from a public health perspective to reopen our economies in stages. The other thing that's really interesting about, pardon me.
No, it's okay. That's okay. I'll come back to you, Sarah. Stephen, I do want to ask you about that. What of the language that Donald Trump has used, saying that the president has the total authority basically over the country in a situation like this? The Constitution doesn't line it out that way. That's just factually not true. What do you say about the president using language like that?
Well, I believe you're absolutely right. The Constitution does not apply or does not allow that to happen. But saying that, the president had has the executive authority to do a lot of things. And in this case, the public health and safety of the country is in danger. And he believed, and it may end up that if this does go to the Supreme Court, and I believe it will if it continues on this path, he believed that he had the power to take the action necessary to protect the public health and safety of the people.
I just want a clarification, though. What do you think will go to the Supreme Court?
Oh, I believe eventually whether he has the authority in a crisis to take the extraordinary actions that need to be taken with regard to the public health and safety of the people of this country. I believe that's going to end up eventually, no matter what the outcome is, in the court. There's a lot of debate. Of course, the governors are claiming states' rights. The federal government has no right to step in. Well, they should. That issue came up during our Civil War, where the states believed in the South that they had the right to keep slavery.
Stephen, I understand. I know traditionally Republicans are the party of states' rights. That is absolutely true, and that all seems to be flipped now. But what I'm asking is, are you saying that you can see a situation where a governor says, I do not believe it is safe to lift any of these orders. I need my people to stay in place. And you could see a situation where the president tries to force a governor or force a mayor to do something that they don't think is in the best health interest of their people?
Well, let me share this with you. It's a little reality check. Those of us who are out on the streets talking to the people. There are governors in this country,
Journalists
and
do
I
that too,
forgot which
Stephen.
state. I think it was Michigan or Wisconsin. Pardon me?
Journalists do that as well. We talk to the people.
Pardon me?
Journalists do that as well. We talk to the people also.
Well, you keep on interrupting me. You want me to answer your question.
But
I was getting to a point that we have a governor in this country.
Go ahead.
You're asking me a question and you're not allowing me to finish it. You talked about the powers of governors versus the president. All right. We have a governor in this country, and there are other elected officials who are mandating that people cannot even sit on park benches. They can't go to their other homes. That is against the civil rights, the rights of the people. We have issues in this country where government officials have gone rogue, and that's not going to be tolerated by the people. Well, my point is, ultimately, it is the people in this country who will make decisions as to how they will conduct themselves and what they can do and can't do through the electoral process. Just
as you said that the president has a lot of powers in a lot of situations, that's absolutely true. But also when it comes to a public health emergency, people's elected officials do have a lot of leeway in telling people what they need to do for the health and safety of others. That's actually not up for dispute. And I don't know that there's a... Let me actually get to another question in this way. Let me ask you, is it concerning that different governors do different things depending on whether or not they're politically aligned with the president, Stephen?
Well, it is concerning that governors are violating the constitutional rights. They're trampling on our Constitution, and the president's trying to avoid that. This is why he didn't nationalize, let's say, for example, a national lockdown. We have to be very, very careful with regard to how we're addressing this issue. And we're looking now at, yes, I agree, perhaps a constitutional crisis where we have political leaders now trampling on the rights of the people. That's a big concern in this country.
Douglas, let me ask you, just to be clear, the president was the one that stated he had powers that are not in the Constitution. The president actually did that, right? So how concerned are you that people's safety, in some cases, lies in the hands of whether or not their governor or their elected officials are politically aligned with the president? What type of response is that to actually help the U.S. get past this?
Well, it's horrific that the president seems to be playing partisan politics during a national crisis. As everyone remembers, during Hurricane Sandy, when that horrible Category 4 hurricane battered the East Coast, President Barack Obama worked hand in hand with New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, who was a Republican, to address the issue, to meet the needs of the people that were suffering because of that catastrophe. So that is the type of response that we want to see from our president. And to address the earlier point regarding a constitutional crisis, this pandemic is unlike anything that we've ever seen before. It is an airborne virus that can kill you no matter how old. It doesn't have any, it doesn't care if you're black or white, if you're gay or straight, if you're man or woman, if you're young or old, it can kill you and it can make you very sick. So we are treading into uncharted territory here regarding how best to deal with this virus. And I understand that, this can become a constitutional crisis. This constitutional is very clearly states the freedoms given to American citizens. However, when it comes to matters of life and death, we may have to make adjustments to how we govern and how we live our lives in the middle of a pandemic. Otherwise, people could die.
Wrong.
And that
Sarah,
is the ultimate measure.
Sarah, let me ask you this. Briefly, Stephen, how is he wrong? I did want to go to Sarah, but I will let you respond.
Look, we cannot change our lifestyle with regard to the rights of the citizens of this country. That was not the intent of the founders of this country. So I'll be real quick on this.
Stephen.
Yeah, we have to change maybe our behavioral patterns. Here, you interrupted me again.
But Stephen, that's just...
Either you want sound bites or you want an intelligent conversation.
Well, we are both having...
Want sound bites? I give you sound
actually,
bites.
we're both having an intelligent conversation. Stephen, this is a pandemic. This is a pandemic. The rules are different, are they not?
Yes.
The rules change.
No, well, the rules, look, the rules regarding behavior, yes, are different. But when you're trampling on the rights of the people, that's where we have a problem. Look, people were going to church. They were going to worship. They're being fined $1,000. And they're social distancing, by the way. They're in their cars. Their right to worship has been taken away in some states. That's going to the courts. In fact, I believe the Attorney General's investigating. So my point is, when you start trampling on the rights of the people, we have a problem. Okay, so people also have a right not to get sick when they step outside. People have a right for their government to protect them. Sarah, let me just ask you about this. Going forward, and it may seem really crass to talk about this in political terms, but it's not, because elected leaders are who you need at times like this. So this is very much political. Going forward, what do you think is going to be on the minds of voters as they go to the polls in the coming months and as we get to November?
Can I say something on the previous point, which is that, I'm an American and I pay taxes. I pay quite a bit in federal taxes as well. And let me tell you, we can't speak for every single American voter, but there is a huge swath of Americans who pay their taxes with the understanding that we are funding the World Health Organization. We are funding the CDC and the pandemic response. We place trust in the federal government to keep us safe so that we can conduct the everyday business of our lives. So this idea of absolute, theoretical absolute freedom that we can just walk into our deaths, I don't agree with that as an American. This is not my understanding of freedom. This is a more complicated debate. What about the freedom to walk outside and get groceries without somebody with the coronavirus who is not paying attention to any of the guidelines, who is listening to the misinformation from Donald Trump, coughing in a grocery aisle and making me critically ill, if not dead? That's infringing on my freedom. So let's not pretend that this is just like this very simple question of freedom versus tyranny, right? And so to answer your question about what's going to happen in November, we have a decision to make in this country whether we value science, whether we value competence. Look at what President Obama did when he left office in 2016. His national security advisor, Susan Rice, had prepared a 40-page document explaining that we are going to have a pandemic. And President Obama actually spoke about it in 2014. And even though President Trump had been lambasting and insulting President Obama in the most egregious terms throughout his campaign and since, he had the class, dignity, and competence to actually hand President Trump Susan Rice handed the new administration an outline of what to do if there's a pandemic response. Susan Rice went on record a few days ago saying she thinks that Trump trashed it. So this is incompetence. These are people not doing their job. These are people going to Mar-a-Lago and to the golf course. and just testing the political winds to see if they can get reelected.
Sarah,
this is incompetent.
That's gonna have to be the last word. That's it. We are out of time. I do appreciate the discussion. This doesn't seem like this pandemic is going to go away anytime soon. So let's try to continue the discussion. Appreciate your insight very much. Thank you to Douglas Sloan, Sarah Altantawi, and Stephen Rogers. And thank you for watching as well. You can see the program again. Visit our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Rochelle Carey, and the entire team. Bye for now.